In the fall of 1950, about 6,000 people in South Carolina opened the newspaper and found out their towns were going to be wiped off the map. Not flooded, not bought out slowly over 20 years. Removed. The houses, the stores, the churches, and every grave in every churchyard. One of them was a man named Bonner Smith. He walked into a store in town, bought 15 cents worth of shoe polish, lettered a sign by hand on a piece of scrapboard, and nailed it up where everybody driving in would have to read it. It is hard to understand why our town must be destroyed to make a bomb that will destroy someone else's town that they love as much as we love ours. Inside 2 years, the town was gone. It's on this list, and it isn't number one. At the top is a place where more than $9 billion got spent, nothing usable ever got built, and 2 executives went to federal prison for it. On the way down, there's a hurricane shelter. The county measured wrong by 10 feet, so the sea came in through the doors with 1,100 people inside. And near the Georgia line, a fenced piece of ground where the country buried its radioactive waste for 37 years. 12 towns, and not one of them ended up this way on its own. But they're not 12 versions of the same thing either, and I'll be straight with you about that. This list starts with decisions where the damage was a side effect. It ends with decisions where somebody looked right at the damage and signed it anyway. Subscribe and stay with me. It takes about 11 of these before you can see how deliberate the whole thing was. Number 12 is Ware Shoals. 3 years after the mill shut down, a reporter drove into Greenwood County looking for whatever was left of this town, and he found it in a small diner where a quarter still bought 2 plays on the jukebox. He wrote down what was playing. Willie Nelson, singing "The Party's Over." There's a hotel here, a stone gymnasium, a stadium, and all of it went up at once. One man put it there, a businessman from New York named Benjamin Regal, who opened a cotton mill on the Saluda River in 1906 and built a town around it, because that's what you did if you wanted workers to stay. The people who worked there called the company Mama Regal, and they meant it warmly. In August of 1982, Regal announced it was cutting 850 jobs. The chairman said it was made with great reluctance and much regret, but that Ware Shoals could not continue with the losses. 2 years later, the rest of it went. June Busby, born and raised here, put it plainly. When the cotton mill closed, she said, the town just died. And a former mayor told a reporter the closing would prove, in the long run, to be the best thing that ever happened to Ware Shoals. He said that in print, while his neighbors were losing their houses. 40 years on, you can drive through and decide for yourself whether he was right. Number 11 is Andrews. By early 1975, some of the workers at the Oneida plant were down to 2.5 hours of work a week. Not a day, a week. Oneida made t-shirts, one of the biggest t-shirt makers in America for a while, about 1,000 people on the floor. It didn't start here though. It came down from Utica, New York in the 1950s, and the family that owned it never left New York. The plant manager didn't live here either. He drove in 20 miles from Georgetown every morning and back out every night. The county line runs right through downtown, half in Georgetown County and half in Williamsburg. On the wall of the old plant, there's still a mural of the whole manufacturing process, faded to about the color of weak tea. Oneida closed in 1996. A woman named Joan Morris, who was 79 when a reporter found her and had worked in the plant offices, described what it did to the town. It was devastation to Andrews, she said. It has just been kind of dwindling down more and more and more. Years later, the mayor stood at those rusted front gates with a camera crew, and somebody asked him what Andrews had now. He looked at the gates and said, "That's this." Number 10 is Winnsboro. The workers here held a funeral for their jobs, an actual one, out in public, because there wasn't anything else left to do about it. Mack Trucks opened an assembly plant in Fairfield County in 1987. At its best, it ran about 1,500 workers, the biggest private employer in the county. In November of 2002, Volvo, which owned Mack by then, shut it and moved the work to Dublin, Virginia, taking around 700 jobs. Then in 2017, the textile mill went too, and that one had been running since 1898. The mayor said Winnsboro had lost the industrial anchor that had been there 120 years. A retiree named Herb Smith, 88 years old, said it warmer than that. That mill really held Winnsboro together, he said. If it wasn't for them, this town wouldn't have grown like it has. There's a clock over the middle of town said to be the longest continuously running town clock in America. Its work shipped from France in 1837 and hauled up from Charleston. Local telling has it that took 50 wagons. So Winnsboro has been keeping time a very long while, and it's spent the last 25 years watching things leave. Remember Fairfield County. We're coming back here at number 1, and when we do, this town is going to look a great deal worse than it does right now. Number 9 is Calhoun Falls. 5 miles west of town, under the water of Lake Russell, sits the plantation this town is named after. The Army Corps of Engineers started filling that lake in 1983. That was a federal decision, made in a federal office, and the place the town takes its name from went under and stayed under. There's no recovering that one. It's just gone. The rest of Calhoun Falls is a different kind of story, and I'll say so. The mill jobs went a long time ago. About 1,700 people are left in this corner of Abbeville County, near where Highway 72 runs toward the Savannah River. The man who owns the hardware store, opened 52 years, told a reporter, "It's been a tough thing getting to where you have trouble finding the basics." Then in 2025, this town closed its own town hall. Staff resigned, police resigned, it went a 4th straight year without passing a budget, and the state opened an investigation. Nobody in Washington did that one. That happened inside the town limits, but a place comes apart from the inside a lot faster when everything holding it up from the outside is already gone. Number 8 is Kingstree. The first tobacco warehouses opened here in 1909, and for most of the century that followed, Kingstree was where the money in this part of South Carolina changed hands. It's the seat of Williamsburg County on the Black River, where Highway 52 meets Highway 521, and it has the look of a place that used to matter more. Courthouse in the middle, wide streets, storefront glass with nothing behind it. About 3,000 people live here now, down 8% since 2020 alone. Poverty around 34%. Tobacco didn't leave because Kingstree did anything wrong. Federal farm policy changed, the market moved, the warehouses emptied. That's the thing about a town built on one crop. Everybody here understood tobacco. Nobody here got a vote on what Washington decided to do with it. Number 7 is Great Falls. For about 100 years, this town did not have the thing it's named after. There were falls on the Catawba River here once, real ones, and that's where the name came from. Then in 1907, a man named James Buchanan Duke started damming the Catawba for electricity, and the water that made those falls went into pipes. Duke's company built 3 cotton mills in Chester County to use the power, and the town grew up around them, about 3,500 people at its height. The falls, meanwhile, went dry, and they stayed dry for a century. The mills closed in the 80s. Fewer than 2,000 people live here now. The water only came back because of a federal relicensing agreement, one of those documents nobody outside the industry ever reads. Duke had to let some of the river through again, and whitewater access finally opened in 2023. The woman who runs the town's hometown association called it a game changer, which tells you how much a town will take when it's been waiting 100 years. It took a paperwork negotiation for a place called Great Falls to get its falls back, and nobody who lived there ever voted on any of it. Losing a river is one thing. The next town lost something you'd think is impossible to lose. Number 6 is Allendale. The road through Allendale is wider than it needs to be, and once you notice that, you can't stop noticing it. 4 lanes, big median, almost nothing moving on it. On both sides, you pass motel after motel from the 1950s, doors hanging open, sign poles standing with nothing left on top. A building that used to sell lobster dinners is a convenience store now. Highway 3. 01 was the road. If you drove from New York to Miami before the interstates, this is how you did it, and Allendale is where an enormous number of people stopped for the night. A councilwoman here named Lottie Lewis put it better than I can. "We were really the New York of all the other towns," she said. Then Interstate 95 opened about 40 miles east of here, and every one of those travelers went with it. That's the whole story. Nobody closed a mill here, and nobody poisoned anything. Somebody in a room with a map drew a line, and a town that had built its whole economy on people driving past it stopped having people drive past it. The travel writer Paul Theroux drove this stretch and wrote that coming into Allendale, he had a sight of doomsday. A vision of ruin, he called it, of decay and utter emptiness. Allendale County has been the poorest in South Carolina about as long as anybody's kept score. Number 5 is McClellanville. The survey said the school sat at 20 feet. It sat at 10. McClellanville is a shrimping village on Highway 17 in Charleston County, live oaks over the road, boats at the dock. In September of 1989, Hurricane Hugo came ashore right about here as a Category 4, and the county sent more than 1,100 people to shelter at Lincoln High School. Families, older folks, children. It had been designated safe for a storm exactly like this one, based on that survey. Hugo's surge ran roughly 16 feet. Seawater came in through the doors and kept coming until 6 feet of it stood in the halls. Inside, in the dark, parents pushed the ceiling tiles out and lifted their children into the space above the classrooms. Some climbed the stage curtains in the auditorium. Others broke windows and got onto the roof. Everybody in that building lived. A woman named Thomasina Singleton, who was in there, said it was a miracle they all survived, and that if the tide had been coming in instead of going out, there'd have been a whole lot of dead people at Lincoln High School. I am not going to tell you somebody ruined McClellanville on purpose, because that is not what happened. Nobody wanted that shelter to flood. A number on a survey was wrong by 10 feet, and 1,100 people went to sleep inside that mistake. But that is where this list turns, because everything from here down was not a mistake. If your town has come up already, or you're still waiting to hear it, put the name in the comments. I read them. And stay with me, because for the last 4, somebody looked directly at what it would do and did it anyway. Number 4 is Pinewood. Lake Marion is where people fish. It's where families keep a boat and take the grandkids out on a Saturday afternoon. And from 1978 to the year 2000, there was a commercial hazardous waste landfill operating a quarter-mile from the shore of it, off Highway 51 in Sumter County, in an old clay pit that used to supply a kitty litter company. In 1989, the state board that regulated it required the company to put $135 million into a trust fund for the cleanup that was obviously coming. Then in 1992, after a long lobbying campaign, that same board reversed itself. What replaced the trust fund was an insurance policy worth about $30 million with holes in it. A conservation group and a small environmental law outfit fought that in court for 8 years and won. The landfill closed in the year 2000. The company declared bankruptcy, and a settlement brought in about $150 million. It wasn't enough, and everybody involved knows it wasn't enough. The state of South Carolina is now required to maintain that site, monitor it, and keep it from leaking until the year 2103. That's not a typo, 2103. A private company made money burying other people's poison beside a fishing lake for 22 years. When the bill came due, the company was gone, so the state inherited a babysitting job that'll outlive every person watching this. Number 3 is Barnwell, 99%. That's roughly how much of the entire nation's most radioactive commercial low-level waste ended up buried in one South Carolina county. Near the community of Snelling, close to the Georgia line, there's a fence around 235 acres, and behind it are trenches cut deep into the sand. Starting in 1971, they filled those trenches with the country's low-level radioactive waste. Not South Carolina's, the country's. Through the 1970s, it was coming in at something like 200,000 cubic feet a month. Now, why here? The usual answer is that Barnwell County was poor farm country with unemployment it couldn't shake, which is true, and that the investors were from out of state, which is also true. Most of them lived in Washington state, about as far from Barnwell as you can get and still be in the country. But the real answer is stranger. In those years, two men from Barnwell County ran the South Carolina legislature almost outright. Edgar Brown was president of the state Senate. Saul Blatt was Speaker of the House. Between them, they held those two rooms for something like 80 years, and they laid out the welcome mat. So the nuclear industry didn't get forced onto a county with no power. It got escorted in by the two most powerful men in South Carolina, who happened to be from Barnwell, and who genuinely believed they were bringing home jobs. They were wrong about the jobs. The place runs on a couple dozen employees. The site stopped taking waste from most of the country in 2008. The groundwater underneath carries a tritium plume monitored 4 times a year, draining toward a creek that runs to the Savannah River. One conservation group in this state has a shorter name for what Barnwell made South Carolina for 40 years. They call it the nation's pay toilet. And there's one more reason the industry looked at this corner of the state and saw the obvious place. The government had already done something far bigger up the road 30 years earlier. That's number 2. Number 2 is New Ellenton, 210,000 acres. That's what the Atomic Energy Commission and DuPont took, announced on the 28th of November, 1950, to build a plant that made hydrogen bombs, about 1% of the entire state. 6 towns went away: Ellenton, Dunbarton, Myers Mill, Hawthorne, Robbins, and Lee. About 6,000 people had to leave, and about 6,000 graves had to be dug up and moved with them. The deadline was the 1st of March, 1952. 15 months to be out. Houses got jacked up onto trucks and driven north up the road, and people stood in their yards and watched their neighbors' homes go past. What was left of Ellenton founded New Ellenton a mile up Highway 125, just outside the fence, and that's where their grandchildren live today. Which brings us back to Bonner Smith and his 15 cents of shoe polish. There's more on that board than what I read you at the start. We feel that they picked not just the best spot in the United States, but in the world. We love these dear hearts and gentle people who live in our hometown. His town was being erased to build a hydrogen bomb, and he was still going out of his way to be fair about it. He was proud of the ground even while they were taking it off him. That's about as South Carolina a thing as I've ever come across. The plant is still out there and still leaking tritium into the streams. The Department of Energy now runs guided walking tours of the place Ellenton used to be, and the people who were children when the trucks came still hold a reunion every year for a town that hasn't existed since Truman was president. Number 1 is Jenkinsville. Before any of this, Jenkinsville had fewer than 100 residents. A crossroads in Fairfield County off Highway 215, a couple of churches, farmland. In 2008, South Carolina Electric and Gas and the state-owned utility Santee Cooper announced 2 new nuclear reactors here, the first new ones in America since the 1980s. Finished by 2024, more than 800 permanent jobs, and about $80 million a year in tax revenue flowing into one of the poorest counties in the state. A state senator from that area said the clearest thing anybody said about the whole affair. Maybe in Greenville and Charleston, he said, 80 million is a piece of the pie. In Fairfield County, 80 million is the whole pie. So Fairfield County believed it. Jenkinsville went from under 100 people to a few thousand almost overnight. Campsites going up, restaurants opening to feed the crews. 25 minutes east in Winsboro, the same town that had already lost Mack trucks and was about to lose its mill, the county borrowed $24 million against that promise. One project was turning the old Mount Zion school building into county offices, a place whose roots go back to 1777. Now, the way all of this got paid for is the part that should make you sit up. In 2007, the legislature passed a law letting the utility charge customers for the plant while it was still being built, before a single watt. That went on to ordinary power bills across South Carolina, month after month, for years, and you couldn't shop around for another power company to get away from it. On the 31st of July, 2017, they quit. More than $9 billion spent. 2 reactors standing half-finished behind the fence, with no way on earth to finish them. Nearly 6,000 jobs gone in a single day, and by that October, Fairfield County had the highest unemployment rate in South Carolina. A laid-off worker named Sherrod Brown said what everybody out there was thinking. It was good money, he said. It kept the community up, and now the community is going to go down. The chief executive of the parent company pleaded guilty to conspiracy to commit fraud and went to federal prison. Prosecutors said plainly that he had intentionally defrauded ratepayers. One of his top executives pleaded guilty too, and the company got swallowed by a utility out of Virginia. And the bill did not go away. Right now, about 800,000 South Carolina customers are still paying off roughly $2.3 billion of debt on those reactors, and they'll be paying it for about another 14 years. Somewhere around $8 a month, every month, from now until the end of the 2030s. Not the executives, not the company, which doesn't exist anymore. The people who live here. Go look at your power bill tonight, because about 5% of what you're looking at is a nuclear plant in Fairfield County that does not exist and never will. And before anybody tells you it's been sorted out, an investment firm is circling those half-finished reactors right now, and a much larger utility is trying to buy Dominion outright. Neither of those deals touches what you owe on this. Your line item doesn't move. The Mount Zion building is still sitting in Winsboro, still empty. $24 million borrowed against $80 million a year that never came. And Jenkinsville is a crossroads again, with 2 of the most expensive unfinished buildings in this country standing behind a fence at the edge of it. So there they are, 12. And they're not all the same, which is exactly the point. Some lost everything to a decision that was really about something else, made by a company in New York or a planner with a map. Others lost everything to a decision where somebody understood what would land on the people living there and did it anyway. But every one of them has this in common. Whoever made the call did not have to live with it. A boardroom in New York, a federal agency in Washington, a regulatory board in Columbia that said $135 million and then said, never mind. Not one of them was going to be here for the part that came after. That's what ruined on purpose actually looks like. It's almost never a villain. It's a signature and then a drive home. Every town on this list has people in it who love it and are working on it right now, and they'll tell you the headlines aren't the whole story. They're right. But what happened to these places is on the record, and the record's worth knowing before you buy a house off a pretty photograph. I made another one of these about the 12 towns in this state that people flat out hate, and why. Watch that one next. The town sitting at the top of it got done the exact same way these 12 did, and once you've seen this list, you'll spot it about 4 minutes in.